Basically, the format of today will just be we've put together a whole host of slides with a huge range of information on and links to other resources that can be used. As Anna said, this PowerPoint as well as a film of this will be online afterwards, so that you can access that PowerPoint with some of those links in your own time. But yeah, okay, cool. Let's share my Google Chrome. Great, can everyone see that? Oh, that's not what we want to look at.
But that is fantastic information.
That was fantastic information. Great. So, and then I now need to put this present. Gorgeous. Okay. All right. Looking forward, how to make COVID safe theatre. So thanks all of you for coming. As I said, any questions in the chat and we'll keep a track of it. Okay, so first of all, just outlining some of the key resources. So some of you may be freshers, some of you may have been here for a while, some of you may be doing an MA. I don't know what your position is. You may or may not be familiar with some of these resources. There obviously are the resources that are on the university website, as you can see at the bottom here with the university coronavirus live feed, which I know some students don't use that often, but that is always there. And then what we have is we have some specific resources which have been tailored towards the performing arts. You have the government performing arts guidance, which is here, follow this link, but you can also just search government performing arts guidance. That talks about two main groups that might engage in the performing arts, professional and non-professionals. Student drama, as we'll cover later, is non-professional, so look out for those sections in that guidance. Then what you have is you have OUDS, COVID-19 resource page, which has a whole range of things on there. It has risk assessment models, it has regulation, it has a lot of other stuff. You have a welfare page, which includes general welfare resources, but also stuff about welfare during the pandemic, because obviously that's a huge issue that we don't want to lose sight of. The TAF Society also have a welfare page, and on that welfare page is their own coronavirus guidance, which applies to things concerning some of the backstage stuff and crew in general. So that's the resources. A lot of the information that we talk about today is from some of these websites and links, just adapted to be a bit more bite-sized. So the biggest thing that we're asked, or I'm asked on a regular basis, is what's going to happen next term. And obviously we don't know to a large extent. Uncertainty is the only guarantee, but we can kind of plan for certain scenarios that are, different levels of likely. So there is the possibility, however unfortunate it might be, and however unlikely it might be, that the national lockdown is still going on by the time that we restart in Hillary. In this circumstance, what we'd be looking at is, as is the case now, all in-person performance and rehearsals being off the card. So, as we'll talk about later, students might have to resort to different ways of making theatre, and we have some ideas further down the slides. The most likely situation, right in the centre there, is that we'll be in some sort of lockdown similar to Tier 1 or Tier 1 to 3. We don't know whether it will be a tiered system. It might just be a different articulation of what is and isn't allowed, but likely to be somewhere near those regulations, whereby rehearsals can resume, but there will be restrictions. It will be in a reduced capacity. Something like the rule of 6 may apply. The rule of 6, it has now been erased from a lot of the government guidance, so I'm unsure about whether that's going to make a comeback, but it'll be a similar level to what was the case in October. So that would still be no live audiences indoors, and all performances would have to be streamed or recorded. That's the most likely. That's what we're kind of bargaining on. Highly unlikely, but would be great, is that all restrictions are eased to a certain extent, which might allow for audiences to attend in a socially distanced capacity and for rehearsals to continue with bigger groups, but that's highly unlikely. One thing that Anna said to me when we were making these slides, which was really helpful, is to remember that actually over the term in Hillary and maybe in Trinity, it's very likely that we might see movements between these different scenarios as we have this Michaelmas. So we started off in a situation which was quite loosely regulated, then we moved to a Tier 1 to 3 lockdown, and then we moved to a national lockdown. So we've got to keep track, and the university live feed does this, OUDS tries to do this, and we do release statements when there are big changes. But we've got to keep track of these changing scenarios, and it's very, there is the possibility that it might be one thing until 4th week and and another thing beyond then. So when you are making plans for theatre, be aware that there need to be contingencies, and you need to think about the possibility that the situation might change as term goes on. Great, so this is one way to think about regulations, the hierarchy of different regulations. One of the things that's really difficult, as we all know, is kind of picking apart what is and isn't allowed, particularly because a lot of the government advice is worded in quite a tricky way. And there are so many different exemptions and difficulties in sort of working out what is and isn't allowed. I mentioned the difference between professional and non-professional, but often there are certain scenarios where there are things that where how regulations apply is less clear. And that's exacerbated by the fact that there are several different layers of regulation. There is national regulation, which is what you find on the government page. There is local regulation, which you can find on your local council page, in this case, Oxford Council. There is university regulation, which again can be found on the University Live page. And there's venue regulation. So in specific theatre venues, they may give you certain guidelines in which you have to operate. Now, the reason these are coloured different colours is because there's a sort of different valence to each of them. What we really say is that the first place you need to look is venue guidance, because venue guidance is likely to be the most stringent. Venue guidance will obey all of the different forms of regulation above it, university, local and national. And venue guidance will be the one where you are most heavily policed, because obviously you're in that venue. So even if there are contradictions between these different layers of regulation, it's that one at the bottom, that one in the dark blue, the venue regulation, that matters most and that you should turn to first. Obviously, inform yourself by looking above, and sometimes the ideas and suggestions contained in the regulation documents above in the university or local or national regulations are really helpful, but the venue regulation is the one that you really, really need to focus on first. One of the things that we've been trying to do in the last month is sort of harmonise as much as we can venue and university regulation, the regulations that we put out through OUDS or through the University Live page with what goes out in venues. But it's really difficult because obviously there are certain different authorities in a decentralized system. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that makes it somewhat clearer where you should be looking when thinking about what is and isn't allowed. So one of the things that, again, is tricky when unpicking some of these rules is what the exemptions are. And a lot of people get confused, not just between professional and non-professional, but between what the different regulations are for indoors and outdoors. Outdoor theatre has automatic natural ventilation. So in a lot of ways, it is much more safe. One of the big problems with indoor theatre is that not only is there not enough room, but there is not enough air movement. So outdoor theatre does have certain freedoms that indoor theatre doesn't. However, one of the things we're really, really keen to stress is that there are separate problems for outdoor activities, such as how are you going to see your audience? Are they going to stand? It's going to be January and February when we and maybe early March when we put plays on. Do we want audiences to be outside? What are the risks of the weather? What if it rains? What does that mean for actors, for safety, for risk assessments, for costumes, for makeup, etc., etc.? What does that mean for the lighting and tech design? How do you have lighting and tech design outside in a way that is safe and regulated? And also, how do you make sure that it's insulated from things like the weather? How do you get permissions for use of university property? I know that one of the challenges that we've faced with outdoor productions is that a lot of university spaces are still owned by buildings, e.g. college gardens or the university parks, which belongs to and is under the authority of the university. You have to have permission to use those spaces for your performance, and often the university is quite resistant to performances happening in those spaces, particularly if that hasn't happened in the past. There might be additional costs to using an outdoor space. For example, if you have to buy heaters or umbrellas or big marquees to protect audience, tech and actors. You have to think about the entrance and exit of audiences. This applies particularly to college garden plays. If a huge number, let's say, 25, well, in COVID, 25 is a huge number, 25 audience members come in, how are they going to get into the garden? Are they going to go through a little corridor, like is the case in a lot of Oxford colleges and cloisters? What COVID risks does that does that raise? And can you have ushers? Can you have ushers in a safe way? And how do you rehearse for the outdoors? How do you make sure that that's properly rehearsed and prepared for? So all of these things are unique challenges and are very, very difficult. And so I think in general, we would really strongly discourage you to consider outdoor performance as some sort of saving grace from regulation. A, there is still regulation in place, but B, there are a whole set of unique challenges. And theatre, in most cases, particularly this time of the year, is not designed to be outside. So other exemptions, again, people trying to find ways out of some of the rules that apply. University exemptions, there are obvious exemptions to certain activities within higher educational institutions. However, this does not apply to extracurriculars such as performing arts activity unless it's part of an educational course. So if the play you're putting on is relevant to your French syllabus or relevant to your English syllabus, that's great, but that doesn't mean that it's part of an educational course. It's not part of the program of teaching, and therefore it's not exempt. Exemptions in places of worship. So these do not apply to any performing arts activities unless they are directly relevant to the place/act of worship. So chapel choirs have some exemptions. Again, they still have to follow certain regulations, but they are allowed to go ahead during this current lockdown. But that is specifically because they are attached to the place and act of worship. So this is something that we strongly discourage you from trying to use as a sort of loophole. And I'm sure that anyone who attempted to would have to be an extensive conversation with whoever runs that place of worship to justify the fact that it's linked to it. Also, as I've said before, we are non-professional. Student theatre is non-professional. So we are not exempt from, as some professional film and theatre companies are. So one of the things that we ask you to do, and this is probably the biggest change from how you'd be producing a play last year, is that we have a COVID-19 officer. So the COVID-19 officer can be a member of the company that pre-exists. It can also just be a separate person, but we'd usually advise it to be a producer or assistant producer or anyone else in the team who has a leadership role. So if you're the COVID-19 officer, it's your responsibility to make sure that the company is adhering to guidance. And again, this is expanded upon in the regulation document on the OUDS website, but the COVID-19 officer is really key to making sure that compliance, the company is compliant to regulations, and that they can be contacted if there is an issue, and to run the things I'm about to detail. So collecting the contact details of all cast and crew. This is essential for the track and trace system. So contact details I'll go into in a second, but it's not just a number or a name, there's a range of things. So contact details of all cast and crew for track and trace, if a COVID case arises, administering the risk assessments, which we'll go into more depth about later, being the point of contact for cast and crew. So that's if there's an issue, whether that's to do with illness or welfare, if a case of coronavirus occurs, but also if someone is feeling uncomfortable about the way that rehearsals are being run, and sees there being a compliance issue. Being the point of contact for all venues on COVID-related matters. So a lot of venues that you might be booking for performance or for rehearsal will be asking for a lot more detail than they would usually ask for. So if, for instance, you're hiring out a college room for rehearsal, they might ask you for your track and trace details. They will ask you for your risk assessments. They might ask you in-depth questions about what you're doing in your rehearsal. And they might ask you to sort of produce some sort of report at the end, or to turn in the key, or to be there before and after the rehearsal to ensure that everything goes right. I don't know, because all venues are different, but it's really important that there's someone there taking the responsibility for that activity. And as I've said, administering the company's contact tracing system. So that's not just gathering the contact details, but being able to use them in the right way should a case of coronavirus arise.
I just wanted to add really quickly, do not take this role lightly. It's a lot of work. So then I would maybe discourage getting an assistant to do it if they're not entirely sure what they're getting themselves into. It's a lot of work, and actually it feeds into a lot of the other things that the company is doing. So maybe an assistant producer, yes, but if they are sort of very well briefed on what's going on, and if they're happy to take on this much work.
Yeah, great point. I mean, Anna is someone who's had experience working within some of these rules. So I will often defer to her as the person who knows more practically what this looks like on the ground. Talking about contact details, as I said I would. Yeah, this is not just name and phone. This is name, college, for instance, if a college imposes a lockdown, or if a college imposes a certain quarantine among a certain number of students, or if you want to get in contact with that college to let them know that this person has symptoms if they haven't done so. An email address, use the ox.ac.uk email address. This is obviously safer. I also don't think it's good enough, not just think, it isn't good enough to be using someone's messenger and to let them know about whether someone in the class has developed coronavirus. It needs to be via their email address, and there needs to be a paper trail, their mobile number, of course, and their term time address. Again, because this applies to what happens in their house, what happens in college. How do you keep track of what of when the right times to self-isolate or not are. It's also worth making a note of whether multiple company members are in the same household, because obviously that affects, again, who might or might not be allowed to come to rehearsals, who might or might not allowed to be able to self-isolate, etc., etc. Great, so that's the contact details that you need to take down. And as I said before, it may be requested by rehearsal performance venues. If, for instance, someone has been in that venue and has developed coronavirus, you might need to get in contact with them. They might need those details. Some venues will want those details in advance, etc., etc. It's also worth noting for GDPR, which isn't on here but should be, is that you need to ask consent to compile and store those details before you do so. So make sure to ask consent. Yeah, cool. So the contact tracing system. So gathering those details, compiling them, storing them. Then you have a case of symptoms developing. So we know some of the symptoms, kind of coughing, loss of taste, loss of smell, but it's actually really worthwhile looking up on the NHS website some of those and reminding your cast members of those, so that there's a kind of general level of knowledge and awareness about what might and might not be dangerous. If symptoms do develop, notifying all members of the company, and within that notifying the company members who have had contact with them and all venues, that the person who has symptoms self-isolating immediately, and company members who have had contact with them self-isolating. And then after 14 days of no one having, after 14 days in which no one has had symptoms or tested positive, then you can resume rehearsals. I've got this down in a clearer way because I kind of rambled it. So register at all rehearsals. Who is present physically? There might be people who are virtually present, but those who are physically present, and also make a note of the date, location, and duration of that rehearsal. Then, if a company member develops symptoms, they immediately go into self-isolation and contact the COVID-19 officer. The COVID-19 officer makes a note of that and contacts all venues used by the symptomatic company member, and contacts all company members who they've interacted with. So all of those contacts, but it's also worthwhile obviously updating the rest of the company, even if they haven't had contact, just to let them know what's going on. And then all of the company members who have made contact with the symptomatic individual should self-isolate, and all performances within 14 days should be cancelled. If no company members develop further symptoms or test positive for a 14-day period, then rehearsals can resume, as I said. Great, I hope that makes sense. I mean, it also is notable that the NHS track and trace system will supplement this, but that's not an excuse not to do it. It's an essential part of your role. You know, really, as Anna said before, don't take it lightly and don't consider it a small duty that you can, you know, do easily. It's really, really important, and it takes time and it takes care, and it's, you know, really, really essential. Okay, risk assessment. So I'm going to pass over to Anna in a second, but yeah, all rehearsal venues should have individually tailored risk assessments this would be a requirement for a lot of venue managers anyway, but OUDS have set the principle that whether or not a venue manager asks you for it, you should be producing a risk assessment in order for a rehearsal to go ahead. And that should be a risk assessment for each individual new rehearsal venue that you use, because there will be unique risks in each of them. For instance, if one rehearsal room is at the end of a very long corridor and has only one entrance/exit, then that will create a whole different system of getting into the room, of using the room, of using the corridor, and that needs to be accounted for in your risk assessment. So that's a must do. And when you're producing that risk assessment, you should contact the venue manager to ask them if they have other risk assessments that you might be able to use as a resource, if they have any tips, if they're aware of any precautions that might already be in place, or if there are any sort of particularities about that space to do with ventilation or high risk factors, etc., that you should include in your risk assessment, which really is just a base level plan for how the rehearsal can go ahead safely, and is essential to making sure that everyone in the crew and the company is taken care of and feels safe. Anna, over to you while I click to the next slide.
You would think that after all this time I learned how to unmute myself before speaking. So I aim to be very brief on this because there's a long, approximately 8 or 9 pages template on the OUDS website, which you can all browse at your own in your own time. But essentially, it should be emphasized this is a COVID risk assessment, so this includes only COVID risks for a performance or for a get-in or for a rehearsal. Perhaps you should have your own risk assessment for all of the other risks that are not COVID, which we've all stopped thinking about, but they do exist still. And this template is not just sort of giving you the table and letting you go with it. It's listing every possible risk you could think of and some mitigations. And these are up to date as of pre-lockdown, because obviously a risk assessment is not really applicable now because we can't have in-person theatre. But it will list possible mitigations, out of which you can choose which ones apply to you and which ones you can do, and so you can lower your risk. We've also produced an example which is extremely made up, but it sort of shows you how the risk system works and the sort of the scorings and all of that. And there's also a blank template. But yeah, all of those can be found on the COVID-19 page on the OUDS website.
Cool. Anna's worked really hard, and it's an incredibly good document, and you know, hopefully is a model that which we can use past the coronavirus system, coronavirus pandemic, because it's a really good way of working out what risks need to be mitigated and how and what that impact will be. Should we move on? Any? I'm
happy to. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next thing is MES, who I don't have a slide from. So I'm just going to go to TAF, but it's actually MES first. MES, who are going to talk a little bit about what programming for their theatre will look like next term, and might add some extras onto what we've already said. Remember that funny hierarchy and venues being at the bottom. It's essential that you listen to your venue, e.g. MES, first and foremost. Okay, Dorothy, over to you.
Lovely. I'm just going to really quickly kind of talk you through the key parameters that will be in place in the O'Reilly next term. Before I do, I should say 2 things. The first is this is a very, very abbreviated list. There is a much more detailed, like 10-page document that you can get if you go follow the link to the website I put in the chat, and it's on the COVID-19 page. You need to go through and read that properly before submitting a bid, because every aspect of the show needs to be thought about. But these are the key parameters. The other thing to say is everything about MES, we are completely kind of under the control of Keble College, so they have ultimate veto on everything we do, and they can change things at kind of as short notice as they like, which can sometimes make me a little bit sad, but it is what it is. So always double check. If you have any questions, contact me or another member of the committee, and just be aware that things can change at any point, and it's just something we have to accept. So we're hoping to have theatre in the O'Reilly next term, assuming that we are out of lockdown. All theatre will be live streamed, so there can't be a live audience. We have camera equipment in the theatre, but it is the responsibility of the crews bidding to find someone who knows how to work it, and if they want fancier stuff, to hire their own in. We think of it as like, under normal circumstances, we just give you the space to work in we don't help you run it or tell you how to do it. It's up to you to do the nitty-gritty now, as it would be any other term. Other restrictions, we are not going to be able to accept bids for musicals or anything with singing in it. I know this is really sad if you like musicals, but it's just college have decided there's too much spit involved, basically. Maximum number of combined cast and backstage crew that can fit into the theatre with 2 metre distancing is 9 people. However, I think if we've learned anything from this term, it's that it's best to keep it low if you possibly can, because we don't know what number the government are going to kind of produce next as like the new rule of 6. So generally lower is better, but we're still at the moment saying we could take up to 9 if it's allowed. In a similar note, where you will only be allowed very minimal sets and very minimal lighting. This is from the point of view of being able to conduct get-ins in a safe and socially distanced way. What this will mean in practice is that there will be 1 lighting rig shared between every show that's on in the O'Reilly that has to be designed in conjunction with all of them and put up at the start of term, so we don't have lots of people in using ladders at different times. Similarly, set should be something that you like, it should be something you can put up and everybody remain 2 meters apart. Nothing really heavy that needs people close together to carry it. Nothing that needs a ladder. You can't fly anything in on the bars because it's just involves too many people. So really simple, you should be able to carry it in like 1 person at a time. At the moment, we are hoping to run the same structure that we were planning to run this term before lockdown happened, which would mean we'd be accepting bids for shows for weeks 4, 5, 6, and 7. However, who knows what's going to happen between now and next term, so watch out for that, subject to change. I should also note that we have not yet opened for bids, but we aim to do so in the next couple of weeks once we've just met with college and confirmed it's all going to be okay. Just in terms of kind of general advice from things because we opened bids this term and then lockdown came along and we couldn't put on shows. But just in terms of general advice is we really, really strongly advise you not to spend any money on anything until very close to when your show opens, because the chances of you losing it are so high. And this is particularly the case of you shouldn't be doing this anyway, but this is not the year to decide to put your own money into something because you will probably lose it. So don't do it anyway, but definitely don't do it this year. Another note, at the moment we are, usually the O'Reilly's kind of quite a venue people might progress to after doing the Pilch or the BT. Because we're aware the circumstances of performing in at the moment are less than ideal, we're not being as picky and looking for really experienced directors putting on shows. It would be fine to bid for an O'Reilly slot with something you might normally put on at the BT. However, we are going to have to be much more strict with things like health and safety because obviously COVID. So it's not a reason to just kind of stick in a bid because you fancy having a go. Talk to people who've done big shows, talk to a more experienced producer, work out if you can get together a team who are capable of doing whatever you want to do in a safe way, because that is the thing we are most interested in at the moment. And in terms of how we are policing all of this, every bid that's submitted to us will have to come with a social distancing statement where you broadly outline what you're going to do. If we then offer to show a slot, that slot will be conditional on receipt of a detailed risk assessment like the one Anna showed you, and I mean really detailed. We will check, and we do have both within the student committee and in college people who have spent a lot of time writing COVID regulations, and we know what we're looking for, so we will be thorough. And similarly, we will be conducting spot checks of things like dress rehearsals, or if you're bidding to film a show, we'll pop in occasionally while you're filming to make sure that both on stage and backstage you are meeting the regulations. If it's just an accidental slip up, we might let you away with it. If it looks like you're deliberately disregarding the rules, we will close the show there and then. So yeah, the rules are not there to be got around, they are there to keep you safe. And you should be adhering to the spirit as well as to the letter of them. Don't try and chance your arm. They are there for a reason. And just a final note from experience this term is, before you bid for anywhere, really think about rehearsal space, because I think John possibly mentioned the thing people had biggest difficulty with was venues were fine. It was finding a room that was going to let you have 3 people in it. And there's no point getting a O'Reilly slot if you then go, oh, lol, sorry, we actually can't put anything on because we couldn't rehearse. That's terribly waffly, but if you have any questions, all the email addresses for the committee are on the website, or we have a Facebook page you can DM and someone will get back to you.
Dorothy, that wasn't waffly. That was great. I am aware that we're like loading a huge amount of information onto people, and maybe I'm hyper aware of it because I actually can hear my own voice and I hate it. But as Dorothy said, you can contact any one of us. It will be online. We will reinforce this. Yeah, that's really, really brilliant. And one of the things that I want to just like emphasize is that the O'Reilly is very likely to be the only venue opening bids for shows next term. So that's one of the reasons that we place such emphasis on the MES, is that actually very, very few venues will be open. And we'll go into that a little bit more later. But if you are considering putting on a play and you are able to take it seriously and you do have a commitment to these health and safety regulations, then definitely go to MES, and that's your place. Harvey, I'm going to share my screen again, and then we can go to TAF. Okay, present. Cool, Harvey.
Lovely. So most of the main things about risk assessments and stuff, of course, you need to concentrate about your COVID risk assessments, but there's a lot of things about get-ins and the standard risk assessment stuff that will need to be adapted for various COVID things. So, for instance, rigging a light in any venue will be on a risk assessment anyway, but it's a case of how many people are involved in rigging that light, in terms of if you're hiring that light, you probably need to wipe it down when it gets delivered. And if you're having multiple people either move it around and then put it up or something like that, you need to have things there to sort of make sure people don't cross-contaminate, basically. But most of that's included on the OUDS COVID risk assessment quite nicely already. The other thing is, for hires from the TAF props and equipment store, we have mostly moved virtually now, at least with all the equipment at this stage. We're trying to get all the props and smaller set pieces on the website as well. But there is, I can put the link in actually for, we have a online rental site now where you can pre-book things. So it means you don't have to come in, and you can have a look through what we have without having to come in and physically be in the prop store. It's to try and limit both the hires managers being safe as well as you guys. We have a general rule where when a prop is returned, we want it to be there for a week before it's put out again. However, we have a system in place where if people are really, really needing one particular item, we have like wipes and stuff to wipe things down with, which hopefully you will be doing anyway before you bring things back. But generally, we'll do it again just to check that everything's working in the right way. I'll just get the rental link for you guys and put it in the chat. So,
John, you know we can see all that, yeah?
Yeah, I don't know why it keeps doing it. I think it's because I'm leaning on my laptop. I don't mean
I see.
Anyway,
so on that hires page, there's a link for all the rental stuff. I think currently it's just the equipment, but hopefully by the end of term and by the next term, we'll have props and stuff for you to do. In terms of other stuff with TAF, generally with only Keeble being available, and Keeble has stock of its own lights, a pretty good array, and also its own camera. There might not be as much stuff that you need from TAF. However, TAF also, if you are planning on using one of the rehearsal spaces that are available to film something, has a bundle of equipment that we've worked together with the Oxford University Film Foundation to put a bundle together for equipment, which includes a camera, a tripod, and various different things that you might need to put on a live stream, such as a video mixing desk, basically. And that all can be hired out as a bundle. And there's going to be a nice YouTube video made about how to use it all. And so you can pretty much then put on a show in any rehearsal venue, as long as they allow you to, of course. But it gives you that possibility to both pre-record and to live stream, because I don't think Keeble have any live streaming equipment per se, just the filming equipment itself. So it just gives you more options to do, especially as rights quite often will only allow live streams over pre-recorded then broadcast stuff. Other than that, TAF is pretty much running as usual, depending on how strict lockdown measures are. For instance, currently we have a system in place where you have to email ahead to get access to the prop store. But if restrictions are eased back to sort of tier 1 level, we might go back to the point where we're opening up 2 to 3 times a week. It really depends on what happens next time. So if you want to know about that stuff, just sign up to the TAF mailing list and we'll keep you updated on that. Yeah, that's it. I think everything else is covered in the risk assessments and all OUDS stuff anyway. So
great.
It's very thorough.
Thank you so much, Harvey. And everyone, I know we're getting towards 8 o'clock, but I'm determined to finish by 5 or 10 past. So stay with us because there's important stuff to come. Harvey, that was brilliant. And I've put some of the links there. Harvey's put some of the links in the chat. Onward and upward. Yeah, rehearsals, obviously the big thing that, as I've said, venues themselves will provide guidance for performances and live streams, etc., and they'll often police that. One of the things that is done more discreetly is rehearsals. So one of the things that we decided at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic was to provide specific rehearsal guidance, because that's the stuff that you're going to have to be deciding on your own and running on your own in a safe way. And it's really, really important that you do that. It's an important responsibility. So on the OUDS website, on the link there, that's also on the first slide, is our regulation document. And basically that details from the start to the end of the rehearsal process everything you need to know. That includes contact tracing, that includes prepping the room, that includes organizing rehearsals, that includes auditions. It has all of those things about what you need to do. It's kind of laid out in a really, really clear and thorough way, if I do say so myself. Within the details about specifically what happens in the rehearsals, there's a whole range of regulations which are taken from the government guidance. So full social distancing, we all know to do that. Face coverings, we're all used to that. Barriers and screens, which might not be an option, but marking out with tape. Avoiding face-to-face delivery. There's a whole range of things. I won't bore you by going through all of the things on the PowerPoint, but look at the PowerPoint, look at the guidance. It's reiterated in the risk assessment. There's a whole range of things you need to do. And I would really suggest that producers and directors in particular, but probably any theatre makers, the place to start is with that regulation document. Start with that, read that through, think about any questions you might have. And then once you've read that, got that, computed that, move on to the other tasks. Booking spaces, yeah, I think Anna might be a good person to talk to about this because Anna has, again, practiced this on the ground. But just from the start, one of the big problems that we've mentioned already is booking spaces. A lot of spaces are not open to students. For a lot of colleges, I think they just see it as a faff, an extra risk, something that's just not worth it. Like, I understand the reason that these colleges and university rooms are worried, but obviously it is a shame. I've worked with the SECG, which is a working group in the Central University that deals with coronavirus, and we've put together a list of possible venues which have said, we've done a big ring round of the university that said that they're happy for students to use them. Some of them you do need to pay for, so that needs to be budgeted for. Some of them are free. So in that list, you just have a range of places that you could book in advance, potentially budget for it, and start early, really, really plan early. I know that's not the way it's usually done. Usually it's, oh, it's midnight, I need to do when to meet, and then work out when the rehearsal will be and where. Goodness, can you message this person to get a room? That's not how it's going to run this term. It's just not possible, and you'll end up shooting yourself in the foot. And additional to that is the BT theatre, which usually operates as a studio theatre. It's not programming because it can't have audiences because it's so small, and there's a lot of safety risks to do with having big audiences in there. So, and we're not programming shows on a week-by-week basis. Instead, what we've decided, because it's a useful external space, we've decided to use it as a rehearsal space. So we've set up a system whereby companies can book the space for a day, one company per day. You can use it for 2 hours, or you can use it for 8 hours. And as long as you book it in advance and provide a risk assessment, as we've talked about it already, you can have that space and use it for filming, rehearsals. You can book it as much as you'd like, but again, it needs to be in advance. Think ahead, and that will be the case next term as well. And more information will be coming out about that on the OUDS newsletter, but that's a really, really useful place to go if you're struggling finding university spaces. Anna, I'm going to head over to you because, yeah, you have experience in this.
Yes, I just wanted to say, everybody says I have experience with this. I could not book a single college room for a single rehearsal in an entire month period. Fantastic that the BT is open now. It will be open next term. It was not open when we were trying to find rooms. So all of our rehearsals were on Zoom or in the park. It was October/start of November, so it was working. It will not work in January or in February, and probably not in March either. So yeah, I will talk about that later, but have a rehearsal room budget and book the BT early.
Yeah. Book early is basically the big message from us, and don't consider rehearsals the kind of low effort fun part of the process. They do also need heavy prep. As Anna's already said, there is the option of outdoor rehearsals, but you really, really need to consider temperature, weather, environment, accessibility, all of those things that might cause problems for your actors or your crew. Another thing to think about is that a lot of those spaces outdoors might have problems that you don't recognize will be problems for your actors. So for instance, you know, if someone has certain accessibility needs that you might not know about, or for instance, if they might feel self-conscious in a public space, all of these things are really, really important to tread around carefully. So I would really, really, really encourage you to avoid overdoing the outdoor rehearsals only when necessary. And I would also really, really encourage you to be sensitive and ask your actors and crew to help you in that process so that you know when it isn't appropriate. Online rehearsals, again, there's a whole range of welfare problems to do with, or potential welfare issues to do with online rehearsals. And so we've, OUDS have put together a set of guidelines for online rehearsals and auditions, which can be found on the OUDS welfare page. The links there, again, is at the beginning of the PowerPoint. Anna, I don't know whether there's anything you want to add to that. No, okay, we're racing through. Yeah, socially distanced performance ideas. Anna, take it over.
Yes, okay, so we've been telling you for about 50 minutes now what you cannot do. So we're now going to go ahead and tell you some things that you can do. So if there is another lockdown, which, you know, is possible, but probably not that likely, but it's possible, any kind of a radio show and remote play is fine. Household shows are a possibility. Some student households are 20 people. That is 3 casts you've got there. Get creative, put something on. One-person shows could work in creative spaces with creative ways of filming with a director via Zoom. And that is mostly what you can do in terms of an actual performance like during a lockdown. In tier 1, 2, 3 type restrictions, you could do films and stream performances as well as live stream performances, provided that you stay within the limit of people which the government is going to decide on. Maybe the rule of sexy, maybe more. Yeah, you could also potentially do a promenade production, again, as long as you stick within that limit. But these are outside and people are moving, which crucially means that they're not going to sit still for 2 hours and freeze to death. And finally, you could probably do full in-college shows. So many colleges have now like open air marquees or perhaps closed marquees. And they might actually be quite keen that if you can prove that your show is safe, they might be quite keen for something entertaining to happen to their students. So that might be a possibility as long as, you know, you communicate with your domestic bursar or whoever is in charge of these things. Yeah, see what you can do. You obviously only have capacity of audiences from your college, but it might be a possibility.
And then these are like my wacky ideas that have come up in the night. So I found them in my hair. So you might not like them, but yeah, there are still possibilities to do across those options, and we would really encourage you to innovate and to cross, you know, the boundaries that we usually see as too rigid between genres. So play readings isn't an example of that. Play readings is fairly simple. Kind of, you could do a book club, or you could do something like a Zoom reading where people take different characters. And then audio and video installations. Can you put audio or video somewhere in your college or on the university so that it can be projected, or you can have headphones like silent disco headphones, so that you can have a kind of constant performance which crosses different formal boundaries. You could have a watch party. You could do animation and record sound online. You could have actor blind reads, whereby you do scenes kind of like blind dates, actors coming to a script for the first time with someone they've never met online or in person. There's a whole range of things, and we would really encourage you to innovate. Moreover, even if you're just doing a straight play, the normal, thing, you've got to let all the things we've told you today inform what play you choose, inform what play you write, inform what play you do an extract of. It needs to be a small cast. It needs to fit into these regulations. It needs to be manageable. There's no point deciding to put on like Les Mis,
How did you know my idea?
In a tiny room in college. Honestly, if anyone does that, I'll resign. So these are some pictures that I found of some plays. There's a Zoom reading clearly there, but there's also some really cool stuff that people have done with video. The one that I really, really like is the one, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the one here with the people, with the guy in the microphone and the person screaming in the background. But a really interesting way to have one person on stage, but multiple presences. How can you combine the virtual and the physical to get around some of the physical, some of the social distancing rules, and also innovate? So lots of really cool options there. The one which is the green background with the blue and the pink person is the poster of an Oxford Playhouse show, which was one of these blind sort of actor performance dates, and it was really, I went to one of them, it was really cool. And the Oxford Playhouse have a whole range of things that you can take ideas from, as do lots of different national and international theatres. So keep your eyes out, borrow, steal, innovate. Okay, show finances again. Anna's going to take over.
The most fun part of all presentations. Yes, okay, so I'm not going to go on for hours about this. There will be a separate workshop just about funding and budgeting on Thursday, which if you are a new producer or a producer that is trying to do something next term, I highly encourage you to attend that. But for now, I'm just going to give you the summary of it. So you should be assuming you can't have any audiences, which means that your show will be broadcast online in some form. If you need a budget, that is, if you have costs, then you need to keep those costs down. I can't emphasize this enough. It's not just that you can't afford it, it's also that your show might have to be cancelled. With all of the precautions in place, it might still happen. And keeping costs down is going to help you a lot if that happens. Secondly, if you need to sell tickets, keep them cheap. This is not just an accessibility issue, it's also a practical consideration. There is so much stream theatre out there, and it is getting competitive. So if you're making your prices £10, I don't think anyone is going to watch that. Some example of prices we've seen are £3.50 and £4, and those have worked fine. Break-evens, aim around 100 tickets. You might get more, that would be fantastic, but 100 tickets is a good place to aim in terms of number of tickets you need in order to start to cover your costs and make a profit. Get lots of funding, especially grants. So that is funding which you don't need to return, because that will help you have more financial security in your show. And it's also it might help you in case you have to cancel. You need to have some kind of strategy. So Dorothy has already mentioned, don't spend money until as late on as possible in your production if you can. And check your contract, see if in case you have to cancel, do you have to return the money? If you don't have to return the money, that means you can use that money to cover a loss in case of cancellation, and that is going to help you a lot.
Yeah.
Could we jump to the next slide?
Yeah.
Please?
One thing I might. Yeah. Oh no. One thing I might add is that when I talk about contingency plans throughout this presentation, and that doesn't just mean think of different ways to do your shows if it can't go ahead as planned. That also means have a prepared plan for if it gets cancelled. So that means know exactly what steps you need to take if it gets cancelled. As Anna said, that includes forward planning financially, but that also means how do you contact your audience? How do you communicate that? How do you make that decision? What steps need to be taken straight away? Anyway, I'll go back to Anna.
Thank you. So when you stream a show, you have a bunch of extra costs to consider. So obviously you might need filming or streaming equipment. That's a given. One thing that people tend to get surprised about is how to transport them. If you have a lot of equipment, you might need to take taxis, and they can get quite expensive. Don't underestimate that. You may also need health and safety budget, hand sanitizers, and all that jazz. If your venue is not providing them, which I know, well, at least this term, the O'Reilly was providing, but obviously that may change. I'm sure the MES guidance will tell you all about that. Props may need to be doubled. If there is a prop which you can't sanitize and which needs to be shared, there may have to be 2 of them. So you need to bear that in mind. Things like room hires, we've mentioned a few times over. Those might cost money now. And finally, insurance. This is actually a positive thing. If you don't have an audience, your insurance needs to be a PLI for film, sorry, public liability insurance for film. That's actually cheaper. Though you might want to consider insuring your film equipment. There is a document with detailed budgeting guidance for social distancing, which you can get from that link. And I'm really sorry for not putting the actual link on because it's a 3-line link, it's a Google Doc, but we will send the slides around and you'll be able to just click on that. In terms of funding, OUDS and several other funding bodies are now asking for the social distancing statement. You're very welcome to use the venue one if it doesn't need to be updated. But yeah, just tell us how you're going to keep it safe for everyone, and we'll give you money, basically. I will say, obviously, doing theatre is inherently riskier right now. We understand that, and we still want to support you. That's why we're here for. That's what we are here for. But having said that, supporting shows is riskier for us as well right now. So we will still need your show to be financially feasible and reasonably safe as much as can be during a pandemic. So please don't underestimate the need for actual budgeting and sort of contingency plans when it comes to funding. Where to get funding from? Obviously, OUDS is the main funding body. Accidental Death Productions is a production company which almost always will fund Oxford shows. They're really great. And there are approximately 10, 15 college-based funding bodies. There is a list of them on the link on the slide. And in terms of grants, that is funding which you don't need to return. The main one is the Cameron Mackintosh Drama Fund, which is administered by the well, mostly by John, but also by a team behind John, but it's mostly John. Next term, OUDS will also be providing very tiny grants, and please ask your JCR for money because they have nothing to spend money on right now, and they will probably want to fund you if you can prove that your show is safe again, that is. If you could go to the next slide, just really briefly, there are some deadlines. So OUDS deadlines we're actually going to open applications twice. We'll open them at the end of this term with the deadline sometime in week 8 to be confirmed. We'll also reopen them in Hillary for all of those shows which will probably not have solid plans until Hillary, and that's okay. But yeah, if you can apply for the Michaelmas deadline, please apply for that one, but it's fine if you can't. CMDF deadline will be Wednesday of week 8. I'm sure there will be an email going out about it. And many college funding bodies will just have flexible deadlines or no deadline. You can just apply anytime. And finally, next slide, please. Thank you. This is just extra details about this funding workshop. So I will literally aims to demystify funding as much as possible. I'm going to explain how it works and how to get it and how not to be scared of funding because it's not scary and we are all students and we want to help you. So yeah, please consider coming to this 7 p.m. on Thursday. And finally, next slide, please.
Yeah.
I just wanted to put down a quick note on streaming licenses because I've heard the term streaming license so much, and actually a streaming license is a really loose term. So you can't just get a normal license for a stream show. If you're going to film or pre-record your show or live stream it, you need a separate type of license. And unfortunately, many companies do it differently. So you just need to check the tiny print and check exactly where your permissions are. So a live stream show is probably going to have a different type of license from a show that you film and then release later. And then depending on how you release it, it can be scheduled content. So say I'm doing a stream at 8 p.m. today of a show that I filmed last week. Or you can do video on demand, which is when your audience pays whenever they want to see your video. That is also possible. And then remote performance is the sort of performances you record on Zoom only, and then you edit together. Those are also different. So long story short, make sure you have the right permissions to put on and distribute a show, and talk to your licensing company, because they probably want you to put on your show. This is the only way to have amateur shows right now. So they will want to help you, but you need to ask if you're not sure. Alternatively, save yourself some hassle, do new writing or Shakespeare shows. That's also fine. But if you do need licenses, just be really careful that you have the right permission. And that's a really helpful guide that MTI have put together about different types of performance licenses that are available online. New slide. Oh, upcoming event. Oh, I forgot about this one. Right, okay. We've got some events still happening. So we're going to start a producer mentoring scheme very soon. And this is where we pair new producers with more experienced ones in order to help you get started in what is quite a tricky time for producers. We are planning a directors book club where you sort of meet other directors and you talk about plays, because I know that is something apparently directors like to do. But that is to be confirmed, and we will advertise that when it comes out. We would also like to have Cuppers and the New Writing Festival in some form next time. We will advertise that when it comes out, because it's quite late and nobody wants to hear about Cuppers, I think, right now. But we are trying to make it happen, and we will do whatever it takes for it to happen in some form at some point.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing to add about Cuppers is I was in a meeting about it today, and I think whatever happens, that we will make sure there are opportunities for people who are freshers in theatre. I know a lot of this sounds really intimidating, and some of you might want to wait until Trinity, some of you might want to blast ahead. Either way, there will be opportunities specifically for freshers, and we are working as hard as we can to make sure that happens. Thanks for listening. I don't know whether anyone has any questions. I'm aware that some people have kind of peeled off as we've gone on, but if anyone has any questions they want to put in the chat, then please do. I know, as I said, that we've poured a huge amount of information online, but this is like a really, really useful range of resources. And if I think back to March, April, May, June, July, August, probably September, we didn't have any of these resources, and it was incredibly scary making theatre, and none of us knew what was going to happen. So use these, make the most of them. Feel free to ask questions and to ask for more and to tell us what you need. But I would really feel emboldened to go away and make theatre. As Anna said, there are future events, there are further resources for those of you who are new, who don't know what producing looks like, who are worried about kind of the basics like funding. More resources are coming your way, but this is a really, really good starting point to just think about the fact that theatre is still possible, and that there are ways of getting around the most obvious obstacles, i.e. coronavirus. Anna's put her email there. I'm going to put my email in there as well. I've already put it somewhere. Anna, could you put the event for funding in there as well, so people can click on that?
I would love to.
Yeah, and click attending. Any further questions? Put them in the chat. Yeah, so thanks, George. That's a really good question. So I think, as you know from your experience at the BT is open, but it's not specifically open as a venue on a kind of formal programming basis in the way that the O'Reilly is. The BT is open as a space, a generic space for any uses. So it can be used for live performance. It can also just be used for rehearsals. I guess the reason that that's an important distinction is because we're not going to be giving you the same amount of time. It is going to be a lot more first come, first serve. It's not going to be curated in the same way. And so, you know, the kind of space, time and energy you'll be afforded at the O'Reilly will be slightly different to the BT, which I think you can consider largely as a space to use at your will, as opposed to a venue that's programming you for a season of theatre. Dorothy, I don't know whether you want to add anything to that.
In terms of distinctions between us and the BT?
Yeah, next term. I mean, the BT is just being used as a space, right? And I mean, the O'Reilly, it's still kind of considering itself a programming theatre next term, right?
Yes, although I should add that I forgot to mention in my bit, we do accept bids for kind of to use it like a film studio. So rather than filming a performance to put online, if you want to create a theatrical themed piece, you can do it and use it as a film studio for a week. So maybe that's a slight distinction as well.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. That's okay, George. Anything else from anyone? Okay, I will stay on this call for about 5 minutes. So if anyone wants to, I'll just have it in the background. If anyone wants to ask me anything, I can answer. But for now, let's say thank you to everyone who's attended. I'm going to do a clap emoji, and please do be in touch with any further questions. Thank you for having your patience with us, and have a lovely evening, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week.
I really like the look of the heart emoji on the video. It's really cute.
On the what?
On the video. So when you react with a heart emoji, look, it just leaves it there. It doesn't look like an emoji. It's really cute.
George, what's the thinking on you writing this? No, you didn't miss that. That's still kind of being lots of questions. That's still being decided, but I think it will probably be in Trinity term this year, and I think that a lot of the questions kind of can't be answered until we have a better sense of where we are in the new year. But I know that came up at the OUDS meeting last week or the week before. New Writing Festival will be happening in some capacity, and hopefully we'll be back to normal in some way by then. So yeah, there's definitely an option to do that. A bit of a waffly answer, but hopefully that helps. So if we film that, if you film the piece of writing that you do next term.
So the way the New Writing Festival generally works is that it's you submit your play, and they get shortlisted, and then the first however many we are actually staging. So then the staging itself, or the filming, I suppose, would be part of the New Writing Festival in a sort of showcase. But naturally, if we have to pre-record them and then release them, that gets more complicated in terms of when exactly it's getting filmed.
I think what I would say is that you're not guaranteed to be permitted to enter if you have already produced your play. I think it's probably quite likely that they'll say it has to be an unproduced script, but don't hold me to that. That might change. I think basically OUDS will be trying to make it as similar to the last New Writing Festival as possible, whereby scripts submitted as scripts and then produced afterwards. But it just depends on what the regulations are. So if you want to go ahead and produce it now, that's fine. Go ahead and produce it now, but it might not be able to. Okay.